Hello, and welcome back to another not EDH deck tech video. Today, I'm going to be showing my legacy deck. This is a funny little deck I call Showanimator. I've actually ran blue, black Reanimator in legacy for a very long time. I know the current normal Reanimator deck is a black-red one, and I've refused to change that due to personal opinions of the requirement of force of will in the deck. More lately, as in the past year or so, I've actually been shoving show and tell into my deck as a fun ploy for sideboard game 2 nonsense. So this is essentially a standard blue-black Reanimator deck with 2 main deck show and tell, 2 more show and tell inside. The reason I'm posting this is I've recently gone to the SCG Con, where I did the Duel for Duels Legacy Tournament. I did fairly okay, didn't get near top 8, so I didn't get anything cool. But also there's a recent banning, and that of Deathrite Shaman and Gitaxian Probe in the format. I'll rant on that at the end of the video, but in short, since Deathrite is banned, I'm fairly certain that the blue-black Reanimator deck will start showing up more commonly than the black-red version, since speed is not really that... It's a hot topic. Let's go through the deck first. Let me plug these back out of here. So, for a Reanimator deck, the whole point is to sequence cards together to get something big and scary and dumb into play. And let's start with the big, scary, dumb things. As most Reanimator decks do, I run 4 main deck Grizzlebrands. Sometimes you'll see decks that only run 3 Grizzlebrands in other tech. A lot of Reanimator decks have alternative creatures in their sideboard. I actually only have 1 in my sideboard. I actually like the idea of keeping all my primary creatures in the main deck itself. That way I can have better reliance, and sometimes it makes for more interesting games. So we have the 4 Grizzle Daddies. These are the typical ideal first targets to reanimate, given a chance, so we can immediately refill. Again, the deck has blue in it, thus we have things like Force of Will, so having access to this draw immediately means we can also try to protect it. Tidespout Tyrant is typically a sideboard card, but I like having it main deck. The chance of randomly seeing something like a Crocus can really screw up a Reanimator deck, and having a main deck answer is good. This is also very good against a lot of various matchups and hate pieces and whatnot that we just need to get off the field. Likewise, I do run a main deck Sigarda. The only creature in my sideboard is actually a Sire of Insanity, and I was thinking about swapping that actually to another Sigarda. This has proven to do very well for me. It makes me immune to things like Edicts, Liliana, whatnot. I can't target it to Crocus back. This literally can just go the longest mile as a 3 to 4 turn clock, depending on how much life they've lost. I've always been a fan of Sigarda as a 1 of, maybe even going to 2 of. A lot of Reanimator decks in the current meta like playing the Chancellor of the Annex. It's a white angel that on your turn 0 effect you can reveal to make your opponents for spell cost 1 more. I have tested that, and while it can be very good, I am not enough of a fan to want to change it into my deck. I also do run a last creature in here as a main deck, Elvish Norn. If you're unfamiliar with this card, I don't know why you're watching this video, but she is a 7 mana, 4/7 Prey Orator, legendary. She's got Vigilance. All my creatures get +2/+2, but more importantly, all the opponent's creatures get -2/-2. A lot of decks in Legacy cannot answer this creature. If this creature is in play, even for 1 turn to wipe a board, then I've most likely taken over the game. So yeah, we have 7 main deck big, fat, scary creatures. The next part of this combination is how to get them in play. As I said, the deck runs 2 main deck show and tell. There are 2 more in the sideboard. This is specifically to play around with the game 2 or game 3 strategy. For example, if the opponent doesn't know what I'm doing and I reanimate on game 1, then they're going to try to sideboard against Reanimator, and then I can just plug in the 2 more show and tell opposed to some other tech in the deck. Alternatively, if I game 1 show and tell, they're probably going to find some other strategy to try to stop this, and then I can take these out for something else. That is the whole point of the Showanimator deck, is just to have a strategy for game 2 or game 3. Let's go on to the reanimation strategy. This is going to be more standard. running blue, we have to run things like the Hapless Researcher over red, which runs things like the Faithless Looting. This is because we have Force of Will, and we have to have a higher threshold of blue spells, or density of blue spells. This is also why I've been thinking about making this Grixis like a sneak and show Reanimator deck. By doing so, I would be lowering the number of blue spells to the point where I don't think running Force would be reliable enough, which then makes me wonder why I'm even running blue in the first place. The idea could be to make the entire sideboard a transformational sideboard, as in the sideboard changes to Sneak and Show, while the main deck is Reanimator. Again, I'm not sure if that is... I don't know if there's enough room to make that function, and I may test that later. But anyways, we have 2 Hapless Researchers. These guys are clever in that they protect me from edict effects, so I can try to save them if I know my opponent is playing something like that. But they are essentially just to draw and discard a card. I can do this at instant speed. So for example, if I'm tapped out and I know what's on top of my deck from a Brainstorm or something like that, I can shove a Grizzlebrand into the graveyard. That used to be a common play to try to fight if there's a 1 or 2 Deathrite Shamans in play. I would have to literally fight through the Deathrite activations by overpowering them, but that is currently no longer a thing, so this may change. But they are good against edict effects. We have 4 Careful Study. This is essentially the Faithless Lootings of the deck. We draw 2 and discard 2. We don't get to flash it back, but these are blue spells we can exile to our Force of Will. And of course, the obvious one is 4 Entombs. Yeah, this is what you would expect to see in any black Reanimator deck. The next half of that combo is how to reanimate the creature. We have a singleton Reanimate in this deck. I may change one of the Animate Dead to a second Reanimate, so we may be a little bit faster out of the door sometimes. The issue is, of course, the life loss to this. It depends on the matchup. Sometimes my life is irrelevant, sometimes I go deep real fast. So 1 Reanimate is in the deck. Exhume is the best reanimation spell because it does not target what you reanimate. So some hate pieces that say you can't target things in your graveyard, this doesn't care about it. This still helps me plug it right back into play. Of course, the issue is this does help the opponent sometime. For example, in a mirror match, this is very dangerous. The best reason to play blue-black Reanimator right now is against the mirror match, specifically because you can counter their reanimation spell, and then you can take what they try to entomb. Those games feel real good. But of course, then there's issues with Exhume being helpful in the mirror match, or if you countered a very threatening creature in the early game and they can just get it right back. Then we have a pair of Animate Deads. Again, these are a little odd. Sometimes if the opponents are playing like an attrition war, they can blow up the enchantment easily if they have something like Pernicious Deed. It's just, these are a 2-mana reanimation spell, but they are tacked on and it makes it extra vulnerable to removal. So these may change. These are just these are the common ones really, and it's personal preference of which ones you play. Next, let's go through the reasons to play blue. We have a few bits of counter magic and daze. There are 2 main deck. I have a 3rd in sideboard, which may come in depending if I'm going first or second in the second and third game. We have a playset of Force Will, which is the primary reason we are running blue. Again, Legacy is not exactly the fairest of formats. You have to have answers sometimes. You can very easily lose before you play a land if your opponent's like playing Storm and they just go nuts on turn 0 or 1. Not turn 0. We also have Brainstorm, which is the second reason to play blue, because in this format we have access to fetch lands and Brainstorm, which is not fair. This is actually my absolute favorite artwork of Brainstorm. I know this was like on Moto for a while. It got printed in this set right here. It's a storm that's a brain, or it's a brain that's a storm. I know a lot of people hate this artwork. I love this artwork. It's great. And we have a pair of Ponders. Again, this is just to help us smooth out some draws and set up our combo, or hopefully shuffle away some junk we don't want to see coming up. Next is our mana. To wrap up the deck, we have a total of 22 mana sources, 4 of which are Lotus Petals. Let's get these out of the way. We have a bunch of fetch lands. We have a nice selection of the Judge Promo Deltas and Judge Promo Flooded Strands. We have 2 Scalding Tarns. This bugs me because they don't match the others. I may end up just getting Bloodstained Mires because they can fetch out the Underground Seas here. We have 4 Underground Seas. ugly white border cards because I'm poor, and we have a tropical island. This is here just for sideboard tech. Previously, I actually used to keep the tropical island in the sideboard, and my lands were different. I would actually run the gemstone caverns, whatever the lucky ones are, but I actually put in the 2 Tarns, this, and an extra island to replace those 4. I think that was actually my most recent change a couple months ago. But yeah, we're actually running 3 whole basic lands in our Legacy deck, which is a little weird. But that's just because Path is a common removal spell, and I like to not just shuffle my deck and do nothing. Let's go to the sideboard real quick here. Now, again, sideboards are highly situational. They are fluid and change depending on what is currently common, like the common decks at the time. Some cards are always good mainstays. For example, Flusterstorm. It's not just brought in against Storm. If your opponents have good, higher volume of instant or sorceries, you can try to force spike or get better stuff out of the way. We have Hurkyl's Recall against basically any artifact-based deck. There is affinity and whatnot in Legacy. We have Fair Macabre against Dredge and other graveyard strategies, something we can just discard. It's a free Exile 2 from Graveyard spell. We have Massacre. This deck, I think the hardest matchup I have, now that Deathright's gone, is going to be more of like a Staxy deck, like a white base. I don't want to say Maverick or something, but Massacre is a very good answer to that deck, and we have a pair of them exactly for that reason. Then we have the 2 more Show and Tell. Again, these come in typically depending on the outcome of game 1. The Show and Tells may come out of the deck into the side, or these 2 may go in, making it a full 4 Show and Tells somewhere. Then we have the extra days, again, depending on who goes first. We have 3 Abrupt Decays. These are the sideboard tech why we have green in the deck. There used to be a Reverent Silence in the deck too, because that destroyed enchantments. Actually, after just playing it for so long, I've almost never brought in the Reverent Silences, because the Show and Tell alternative beats the sideboard hate, the graveyard hate. And being honest, if I keep tuning the deck, I may not need that trop anymore if I can find better or an alternative to these guys. And the last one is Sire. Again, this may end up being a second Sigarda. Some decks, the ones that hacked all the Diabolic Edicts and the Lilianas, things like that, they tend to really make a Reanimator strategy suffer because you go through so many cards to get one permanent into play. If I can't counter whatever they're doing, yeah. But Sire is actually a very good card. This is the more commonly one seen in the blue or the black-red Reanimator deck. If they get it out and play, they just dump everyone's hands. The problem is this doesn't just always win you the game. It can put everyone hellbent, but if this thing is exiled from a top deck path, then that's a very over game. So, but yeah, this is my current Legacy mainstay. I love black and blue Reanimator. This is something I've played for literally an eternity, but this little fun interaction here is interesting. And I like show and tell decks, I like Reanimator decks. So this is my little homebrew. And as I said, the deck tech is over. I'm just going to rant here for a little bit about the recent changing. I am happy that Deathrite Shaman is banned. That was an excessively high volume of decks, and seeing 3+ color decks rampaging through, it was tedious. I did like the complexity that Deathrite added to the format, and it was very fun seeing Deathrite versus Deathrite battles and making, like, those were actually very interesting games to watch. Now, as the person who plays Reanimator, by default, I'm happy it's gone because I no longer have to mulligan for Force Will just in case there's a turn 1 answer to my deck that's main decked. But as a complexity standard, I understand why they did it, and I am happy. The other end of the spectrum is Gitaxian Probe. I feel that was a terrible idea to remove. And everyone I talk to about it, they keep quoting the exact text from the article about the banning, saying that it quote-unquote gave perfect information. There's a lot of issues with that, like people do play Brainstorm and fetch lands to hide your cards from Cabal Therapy. So you don't always have perfect information. And if you're saying things about, like, it makes your deck 60 or 56 cards, then you're also forgetting about the sheer number of decks that run things like the other free cantrips, like Street Wraiths or whatnot. Street Wraith is not really seen in Legacy, but it may now, because some decks need that free cantrip. And technically, if you want to be specific about that, the reason people run fetch lands one of the reasons is to lower the technical number of cards in your deck by thinning. So that's not a good argument for banning Probe. I think the reason for banning Probe would be to stunt some of the broken decks in the format, but the ones that are really broken that use it would be Storm, and that's more like a gamble deck. It's not always a guaranteed because it depends on what you draw in your luck, really. Storm is an extremely skill-intensive deck, but it is also very luck-based. Like, it's hard to say luck-based. It's just, I don't know if banning Probe is going to change the odds of, or the performance of Storm. But by banning Probe, they've actually nerfed a lot of Tier 2 or Tier 3 decks that were not actually like scary. For example, Goblin Charbelcher. Like that's a very funny deck. It's actually kind of one of the cheapest decks. Granted, it runs it runs one Taiga and it runs like 4 Lion's Eyes, but that's one of the most cost-efficient, not burn legacy decks, and they just kind of hurt it a bunch because they took 4 cards out of that deck. Another deck that randomly got hosed would be a Veteran Explorer deck that runs Cabal Therapy. And that's a very good combination. Reasons people play Cabal Therapy and Veteran Explorer together is because they have access to Probe, so they can get some good value. And again, this is a deck in Legacy that plays a massive number of basic lands, thus making it one of the most cost-efficient decks. But for some reason, they banned Probe, thus making one of the most cost-efficient entry-level decks for people to get into the format much less appealing. So yeah, I can go on my rant horse about this for a while. I just feel that the banning of Probe was a terrible mistake. And I should probably just stop here. So anyways, if you have any ideas or feedback on this type of deck, my Showanimator or Show and Tell Reanimator deck, I'm always open to feedback. If you were one of my victims or if you destroyed me at STG Con, shoutouts and thank you for the fun games. We had fun. So if you like the idea of a Reanimator deck with a transformational sideboard to be Sneak and Show, that is something I've been considering, and I have a deck list brewing. I may post that after a few more tweaks down in the comments. Thanks.